might arise when we were thinking about this the other day. All right. So I'm terrible with touch screens, you just have to bear with me.
I'll editorialize one more moment on the NRD program while you move on. Is that is by design a best bang for the buck number that comes out. So a good example is if a damage happens in the Mystic, a restoration will never happen in the Mystic when it goes to the in lieu fee program. It will go to a marsh, in Marshfield or wherever habitat can be created for the lowest cost. That's how DER prioritizes the implementation of in lieu fee dollars. So if you speak with them, they'll tell you, you'll never see an in lieu fee dollar spent in the Mystic for the inefficiencies of investing those dollars locally. The damage is locally, restoration heads up the coast because it's still in the north coastal region.
Right, I have noticed that, and so that will also be addressed in my exciting conclusion.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of build up to this.
I know, I feel a lot of pressure now for this last piece of the presentation. This is supposed to be an animation, isn't it? No, this part's the overview.
It gets better.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's you and you say, whoa. But we have thought about, basically, one of the questions that came up at the advisory committee meeting was, if the intent is to be more efficient, how does the administration of this process work to achieve that efficiency and make sure that when you're looking at smaller to larger amounts of damages that, in NRD, the assessment costs should be reasonable relative to the recovery of the damages. And we have to make sure we do that with this process as well.
Whoa.
So,
Hold on.
if...
You're rebuilding it, I see.
Yes, I'm rebuilding it, so it's not as overwhelming. So, in the first set of the process, we would get a permanent or temporary solution statement or other type of document and determine if the case is appropriate for the standard assessment. If not, it would go into the comprehensive assessment process. If we determine that it is, we would calculate the damages using the method or the final method that we end up developing, and we would send the claim to the potentially responsible party. And again, using the data that we just discussed. And I think that's supposed to be PRP either accepts the claim or modifies with supporting documentation. So there are some elements that are site related that were reported to us, but perhaps there is different information that people could provide that would help modify that. And I would, there are specific places where we feel like we could accept modify or at least evaluate modified information. And then hopefully we get to the claim paid aspect. So another way of getting to the claim being paid is that, we might have an informal conference with the responsible party, and then once we have a conversation about that, we would accept a modified claim or issue a notice of a final claim to the responsible party, and then have that. There would then be due process in terms of, I think we were having an adjudicatory process step built into this process with the ultimate option of appealing and then a claim paid. Well, no.
Well, it was on your big slide, it was where.
Oh, well, there's going to be more to this, yes. Yes, exactly. It's there. But we're not going to go into all the steps that are involved in it, was I guess what I was going to say.
Got it.
Yeah. So there's another thought that we were, thought process we were going through, where if the PRP, in filing a future form, or when their standard form with perhaps another element to it, indicates that they will complete a standard assessment, or no, if yes, they would calculate the damage using the method that's in the regulation and send that to DEP that And then we would either accept it or modify the claim with supporting information. And I think this brings in Patrick's comment about perhaps there's another agency, perhaps there's a municipality, perhaps there's a nonprofit. It could be a range of folks who might have additional information that that could factor in. And I don't know, Paul, if you want to add anything to that aspect of our conversation.
Not yet.
Sounds
Yep.
about right? Okay, good. And that we would then issue a modified claim back to the responsible party with that supporting information. And if we did not reply or send that back in a certain amount of time, there would be presumptive approval of what the PRP had sent to us, and then leading to the claim paid. So this is sort of a big picture, and we are certainly very interested in the administrative aspects of this because we want to make sure that that not only is the method being designed with efficiency in mind, but the application of the method is being designed with efficiency in mind. So we're very happy to have some more feedback in this area as well. Before I move on, are there questions about this, or does this change any prior questions that related to this aspect?
Well, Patrick's question causes me, I was holding the question, but I think the whole discussion of invasive species is a rabbit hole you ought not to go down. I don't think the LSPs are trained in that area. Very few of them have botanical, biological training, many more, they're much more in the hard sciences, and so that requires a whole separate analysis that you all are very familiar with wetlands, but you're not familiar with the UWSC. And I don't frankly know to what purpose. Despite having worked with natural heritage in my previous iterations, I'm not sure the biological theory of invasive species has much relevance to this discussion. I think it's just, you go down, already it's not even out of the box yet, and you have a watershed group saying, well, gee, no, we want to dispute the presence or non-presence of invasive species. I don't think it's relevant to anything. The purple loosestripe, you may call it invasive, other people will call it beautiful.
True, but it does definitely has a different functionality.
It may, but
I mean, I'll to
I don't know why you go down the
editorialize.
rabbit hole.
But
On
your
the other
comment
end,
is well taken about the observation piece of that not necessarily being something that is reliable or necessarily warranted. So that, I mean, that's why we wanted to
And remember,
invite the
DEP
comments.
and the LSP board have gone after people's licenses for mistakes.
Yep.
So I think you're gonna have LSPs saying, I have not signed in that form.
Well, I'm assuming this is not an LSP-driven process, actually.
But now you gotta hire another
There are two
consultant.
possibilities here.
No, but even if it's private, they're not doing a response action, so why would it be LSP-driven?
The LSP wouldn't be opining on it, but kind of the difference in the green versus the blue chart there is kind
Is it
of
privatized?
is to what extent, who initiates it, how efficient you can make the process, and it may not be this or that, it may be an option, one or the other. But if we can have the process where the person who is acting as an LSP may also be using the information that they gathered as an LSP to help fill out the forms and do this, and that would have some efficiencies involved with that. So they wouldn't be acting as an LSP, but it may in fact be the same person.
Which is on a BWSC form, that's gonna be a tough discussion with the LSPs. And if you go, I mean, we're talking maybe ultimately about $5,000 of fines or damages, or maybe $2,500, to go out and hire the wetlands consultant to analyze it, means the PRP incurs $1,000, $2,000
Well, I will tell
transaction
you,
cost to deal
one
with
of
a
the
$2,000 fine.
thoughts we had, and I'll throw this out for you all to think about, is one of the early thoughts we had was perhaps to make use of the 303D list, which DEP prepares and sends to EPA and reflects, it doesn't necessarily reflect the habitat quality, but it does affect the water quality of the system that is under consideration. So I guess I would encourage people to think about, are there desktop / data that others have collected that we could rely on that perhaps remove that concern? I see Patrick might be leaving any moment, so should I get through the rest of my slides and then go back for a question?
Comment on this.
Okay.
The invasives in your calculations though, if their presence would
No, I want you to
discount-
hear, hold that thought. I want, because this addresses the question you raised earlier. So, let me- I wanted to go through this and then we can go back. How's that?
Yeah.
So you commented about urban areas and restoration, so something to think about. And you commented about what are we going to do with $500?
Right.
We are proposing to pool recovered funds by watershed or sub-watershed, and then use a grant process that we've actually developed and used on several state-only settlements that we've had for oil spills and other contaminants as the vehicle for doing so. And I guess I would ask you, Patrick, to think about the second piece, where we can actually use the funds in terms of restoration to improve the baseline conditions of certain water bodies, certain wetlands, etc. So before you run off, I just wanted to mention that. And the other thing I do want to mention in terms of efficiency, those of you who are familiar with the process that ensues when you have a settlement under both the federal and state authority and you have federal trustees involved, a restoration plan is required to be developed. We don't have that requirement under our statute if it's a state only. If it's a state only settlement, we can hold public informational meetings and consult with our sister agencies and go right into our grant process. And that's what we did with the spill that Alicia is mentioning. But we have pictures of the town of Arlington only because we have pictures of the town of Arlington. But both Arlington and Medford are implementing water quality and riparian improvements in that reach of the river. We were able to actually supplement the settlement funds with some additional funds so that we could fund both communities' projects. So now you may leave Patrick with more knowledge.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I really do appreciate that there's a component in here about environmental justice. And I think that's important to the numbers of communities in Chelsea and East Boston, Revere. I think about one category you have there about water quality improvements, restoration in some of these really urbanized areas ends up being off of the resource in the city itself to improve water quality.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those interventions require maintenance over time. So the cities themselves are going to be hesitant to take them on. So one of the challenges about some of these restorations is you get a pulse of funding to implement it and no funding for maintenance.
And that's true of any NRD settlement. And in fact, one of the things that outside of this process, because it's a universal concern program-wide, and because our sister agencies who are focused on land have been also incorporating and starting to conduct a lot more stewardship activities, not just we bought it, isn't it nice, it's going to be nice forever. I've started to think about, how can we as a program support stewardship activities on projects that we fund through settlements, whether it's through this process or through a comprehensive. So it's absolutely nationwide, actually, an emerging issue for these types of restoration projects.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Can we let Alicia go first? Because I sort of shut her down, and then we'll go to you, Seth. So do you need me to go back to that slide, or do you?
It was sort of, so what, when you were asking the question about the invasives, it seems to me that in this thing, the identification whether or not they're invasives, if I understood it correctly, I understood you to be saying that, where there's invasives, that means it's worth a little less, so the fine will be lower.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yep.
It's not a fine.
The dollar amount.
Yeah, the
will be
claim. You
lower.
can say the claim. Yes.
But then I'm also aware that when you're trying to restore an area, if there are invasives, you actually have increased costs
True.
in restoring it because you can't just plant stuff, you have to take those out, and sometimes those are hard to get out and keep out, harder than just a damaged wetland plant. And an invasive plant, the invasive, it's harder to get out of there. And therefore, it seems to me that if there's an argument that figuring out the amount of invasive in the area is not an appropriate use of the resources in figuring out the claim, like, I would be fine with that, because that would mean you just wouldn't have that discount, because it sort of would balance out there, right? You wouldn't get the discount because the land was worth less, but it would provide a little more money in order to be recovered. Now, of course, I'm thinking about this idea of a one-for-one. If that's the riverbank that's damaged, you have to repair that riverbank, right? As opposed to what you've now just proposed is that riverbank was restored, anywhere in that watershed or sub-watershed could be put forward as the restoration site.
And I think that that's a good point, in that if it's not invasive species, there would be some other measure of invasive. So it's not just like, well,
How
invasive
would the
species might not work for these reasons, which we have thought about all those reasons that you mentioned there. But there would be another measure like what you mentioned, the 303D list, where some third